Thank you very much. I think we're at the last grain of rice because for the last 11 weeks or so, we've been running a tour of a play called Rice, written by Michelle Lee. This is Michelle Lee.
Hi.
So I'm going to take us through some kind of housekeeping first. So first of all, I'm Matthew Zia, Artistic Director of Actors Touring Company. We present international work in the UK. And this is Michelle Lee. Hand over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I've flown in from Australia about 3 weeks ago. I'm heading out tomorrow. Is that an adequate summary of like travel itinerary at least?
You've told us where you're going and what
I
you're
have
doing.
a passport. That's been established.
I mean, I think it suffices that you're a writer, doesn't it? I mean, is there more you want to tell us about how and why you're a writer, maybe?
Yes, I am a writer. I've been writing for theatre professionally over about 10 years and have moved more recently into screenwriting. But while I was mainly just writing for the stage, it was audio, it was live art. And why do I write? I guess that's a way for me to kind of wrestle with the world and give back and kind of talk to the world. That's my kind of sense making and hoping to share that with others who might kind of occupy similar positions. Other people who might be women or Asian might be a simpler way to put it. Mm-hmm. So I write for specific kind of audiences, but also hope that the work is seen beyond those types of people as well.
I've got questions now. I'll have questions. Turn it up. I need to turn us up, apparently. Let me see if I can do that on here. Bear with. I think I'm as loud as we're going to go, so we might just have to project a little bit more. We'll come a bit closer. How's that? Cool. So some housekeeping, which I guess is to try and make this a safe virtual space. We automatically have everybody on mute. We love seeing our audiences engaged with us, but you don't need to have your cameras on if you don't want to. So it's completely up to you if you have your cameras on or off. However, Melina, who is tech queen for us, is managing whether you have the power to speak or not. So we'll invite you to speak if you have a question that we want to hear. We will be recording this Q&A. We are recording this Q&A. We are already recording this Q&A. It is happening. So again, keep your cameras off if you don't want to be seen on there. And that's to be shared with people who would also want to tune in. That feels very 1980s. Tune in to what Michelle and I have to say. We will do our best to get around to all questions that we've received through the sign-up form. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And Melina will try and get them over to us and we'll try and answer them. We always want to know what you think. So also in the chat, Melina's going to be putting a survey asking what you think about our Q&A, and we can then look to make improvements for future events like this one. And we want the Q&A to be interactive. So please do use the reaction buttons. Let us know you're having a good time with us, if you're having a good time, of course. If you're not having a good time, go and do something else. That's how it works. Discretion is yours. So some of our viewers may not have been able to see Rice when we did it at the Orange Tree in London, nor will they have seen it on tour. So this is fun to describe the play to those who have not seen the play. So there are two characters. There's a character called Nisha. She is the, I would say, second in command of a major rice growing, distributing organisation called Golden Fields in Australia, in Melbourne. She has a grandmother who's poorly with Alzheimer's, who has moved her family. She was the migrant and she moved her family and their hopes and dreams over to Australia, which is where Nisha's born. So she is technically third generation migrant, although I struggle with the idea that we carry our migrancy in the place that we're born. Surely only the first generation is the migrant, and then everyone else is just whatever. Anyway, she's hatching a plan to take over India's, or to supply rice to what is essentially India's welfare system of distributing rice and other necessities to people who don't have them. And she thinks that the best rice that India can get its hand on hands on his Australian rice, disregarding all of the Indian rice that they already have there. So the kind of secondary story that sits alongside that is the woman who cleans her office is a first-generation Chinese migrant called Yvette Tang. And she also has her own dilemma, which is that her daughter has been involved in a protest around food waste, which has accidentally resulted in, I guess, assault. So in that they threw food at somebody, off rotting food that the supermarkets have been chucking out, and they store this food and they chase down the CEO of the supermarket. They chuck it at him, and he slips and he falls into an eel pond. And I knew it was funny every time I watch it, but in saying it out loud myself, it is hilarious. He falls into an eel pond and gets infected with type 1 eel herpes, and so it stops being a protest and becomes a kind of GBH assault case. And so she's trying to save her daughter from going to prison. And I guess what the play is about is kind of how Nisha and Yvette affect one another's lives in the scenario you've set up.
Mm.
Have I left out some glaringly important, kind of obvious story points, plot points? Or?
No, I think that gives a good indication of what happens for both of them. And yes, when we meet them, they not exactly ships in the night, but they don't yet have a sense of camaraderie, but they build that along the way. So it is unlikely friendship through them kind of sharing that office space that Nisha works in and that Yvette cleans.
Yeah. And then I guess thematically, I mean, it's dealing with Los, isn't it? It's dealing with like international food politics, it's dealing with migrancy, it's dealing with motherhood. Like motherhood for me is the thing I keep coming back to about this play. And the expectations that are placed upon the child, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess the idea of the village, if that was a unit in which we understood how we formed relationships and we passed on wisdom and we formed identity, obviously the idea of what a village is in some ways, there's more options for that these days, but also in another way to kind of talk about that is like it's not as clear cut. So of course they have as Matthew's described, like they've got their individual like biological blood family, the family that raised them. But we do live in a world where we kind of overlap with our friendships and relationships and our sense of finding family in our professional settings and the day-to-day settings. So that it's matriarch and it's mother figures and it's parenting and it's passing on wisdom and kind of shepherding through the world in a kind of modern type of sense of the village family unit. But it is quite like matrilineal because the two main characters are women.
Yeah. Cool. So if that's a satisfactory synopsis, we'll jump into our questions. So the first questions we have are the 3 most received questions from audiences whilst we were on tour, and then we'll move on to the sign-up form and your questions. So this one did come up a few times. The first one is, why choose to only write for 2 actors in a play in which there are so many characters? So I guess what we didn't mention in the synopsis is, of course, that you've got Nisha and you've got Yvette, and they are the central characters. And then in a way, Yvette plays the actor who plays Yvette plays everyone in Nisha's life, and the actor who plays Nisha plays everyone in Yvette's life. Mm-hmm. Why is that the form that you chose to kind of place this world within?
Yeah, so I mean, there's different ways to answer that question. So when I wrote the play or began thinking of it in some ways many years ago, it was kind of in response to what was happening in Australian theatre, where I felt like people of East Asian background had more limited opportunities for the kind of characters that they could perform. So I deliberately wanted these 2 characters to be like the protagonists that Matthew's mentioned, but also the other characters in their lives across gender and age and culture, that the actors would be able to inhabit them. And what I've enjoyed about watching it in this production and in the one in Australia was, what you also get is that these 2 actors kind of never depart from each other. So yes, they play across roles, but then just the physical sense of the world is only made by these 2 people. So yes, they jump across characters, but in a way it then speaks back to the key relationships. And for me, there's a theatricality that possibility that's only available in theatre. Yes, if it was the movie or if it was the TV show, then of course it would be an ensemble. But it's not. It's a piece of theatre, and it's kind of relishing with the opportunity to character flip and for the actors to kind of show their skill. So there is like the politics of it, like it's only two women of colour who get to tell the story, and there's the skill that we get to watch. But also the form of it is, for me, highly theatrical. That it would be a different kind of experience if it was like, let's just get a whole bunch of, let's cast all the roles with a fidelity to like closer to the people's identity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I found that incredibly attractive as a kind of invitation as a director, actually, to come and play with two actors and build a whole world of relationships and complex relationships. I've got a slightly secondary question off the back of that, which is there anything implied, like if I missed a trick in something, because I'm aware that in the play it says Yvette as Tom. Is there anything in, and I don't think there is, otherwise I hopefully would have kind of moved towards that, but then like, this is how Yvette sees these people, or like the central character wearing the costume of.
No, I think that maybe there's a bit of tension between it is very performed and at times is direct address, and they say at times literally we're telling you a story, but when they get into the scenes, it is more written like they are the characters, and the direction that you chose and the performance decisions to kind of honour that sense of like, and then we are just with them. That's not always sitting in the register of like, it's all pretend. So no, I don't think it's written that way, and I don't think the play is intending to go, this is how they see, and also because there are just moments where the other character isn't. They're seeing it anyway.
Yes, yeah. Super, thank you. So I'll work out what the play is during this conversation as well. How did you work with the actors to make the shifts of time, place, character so clear? I kind of feel like that's more for me. So time, place, and character shifting. The thing shifts out in one moment every time it shifts. So they are always the same. There's always one shift we're trying to make. I think that's me trying to make it not three distinct things. So we have to find a character in a particular time and place, and then there's a shift, and it's another character in another time and place. I mean, the real simple answer is we worked with professionals, experts in the field of movement and voice and dialect. So we had Kathy Wheat come in and work with the actors on dialect. Kathy is Australian, and so kind of, I guess since we've got something like 6 Australian accents in the piece, could help find differences amongst them and help the actors work out what they needed to do. Angela Yeoh is British born, Australian raised, also spent time in mainland China in a previous career. So lots of, the actors brought their own thinking to it, of course. And then we worked with Ashley Jennings Grant. Her thing was very of each character. So in the most basic way, I don't know, you could say that someone like Gretel Patel, who's the advisor to the Indian Agricultural Minister, her main function in the piece is to toy with Nisha, or to waste Nisha's time, or to expose Nisha. And so lots of her physicality becomes about that. How do you waste time? How can you slow a movement down? How can you take more time with the way that you are? Someone like Tom, and again, he's got to have a fairly clear function as such a small character. And I think his main function is to sleep with Nisha. And so he comes in as this kind of Lothario character. So there's lots of kind of pelvic gesturing and leading with the hips. So yeah, and I guess it was like Valerie, for example, the older Russian supervisor who we assume has lived in a life of kind of, I think it was like those moles that have been underground for so long. They move very slowly and they can't see very much because they haven't really needed to. And that's a bit like Valerie. So she's got ailments. Again, like what is the world of work and how has it affected her physicality? So that's what the shifts were. And then in order to help that in production, working with Lex Kosanke and Beth Cupwell, lights and sound, to just make sure that we were always moving in one movement. So I put my hands on the table and become Cherie, for example, and it becomes a rule for everybody that that's the moment we shift.
I'm finding that, I don't think I've heard you speak about it in that way, like the precision in which you've calibrated all those things. To me, and I mean, partly the more I watched it, the more I understood that, which I really enjoyed. Going, oh, there's so much thought in just those little quick changes, but the precision in which you and the team were able to execute it. And I think it was really successful. And as I hear you talk too, I think leaning into some of the humour of it as well, like to go, what is something, what you just described, that it's funny as well?
Yeah.
Like someone who time wastes, someone who wants to just bang Nisha. I think that undercurrent too to the physicality, it's great just to hear about it from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think it is, and I've always said it's such a funny play. And I think we made a decision which was like, the less stage time a character has, the bolder they have to be drawn in a way. So like Valerie, we see her 3 times. Yeah. She's got 4 lines of dialogue each time we see her. So she has to really kind of leave a mark. Whereas someone like Graham, who we see maybe 6 times across the show, it feels like can be more nuanced in the choices.
Yeah.
Michelle Lee, why does the end of the play offer something more hopeful? So this is something we were asked a couple of times, but it was also lovely hearing everyone's response to the end of the play, which I should probably describe as well for those who haven't seen it. So why does the end of the play offer something more hopeful and then snatch it away? So you've got this narrative form working throughout the piece where the actors go, this is the part of the story when we eat. This is the part of the story where we first met each other. This is the part of the story where I tell you about. And they have this kind of explosion towards the end, and they hurt each other deliberately, and then they care for each other very deliberately, and then they self-narrate. And I made a choice, which is now they narrate to each other. It's not for us. So they do it for each other. I take you home. I drop you off. We eat together in your house. I do the dishes. I give you a gift. And then the next line is, no, that didn't happen. You didn't drive me home. Waste of petrol. Very pragmatic. But I guess kind of denying the slightly fairy tale ending that's been set up. So what kind of sits under that for you?
Yeah. And you're right, there were, when we discussed it in some of the Q&As, I was kind of, because I was returning to the play, so trying to make sense of it, where I am in my life and what's happened in the world as well. So I could definitely read that layer of, if the very final thing is no, that didn't happen, a kind of a pulling of the rug, I was like, what is that about? But then, of course, if I'm just focusing on that, then I forget what's kind of led up to that. And it's beautiful hearing about that intimacy of them directing it to each other, because we did hear from people in the audience their different kind of readings, which is kind of what you want as well. Like, you don't want to prescribe like a one-note type of like, where does this leave you? And people talked about what they enjoyed about, because another way to ask it is like, well, why have 2 endings? Like, why dream up a fantasy life where you become friends with the person at work, whether that's a colleague or the cleaner or your boss, or when you move outside of the frame of work, that proximity, why linger and why stay friends? So we get this fantasy version where you are welcomed into the home and you share, and then we end, as Matthew said, with a no, that's in a way like that's not realistic and it didn't happen. So why have the 2, and why not just pick one? And I think it's maybe in the greedy way, kind of me going, well, rather than a denial, why can't they for a moment just exist in a moment of shared kind of romance and intimacy, about that there's enough there that they would both want to have spent more time with each other. And then that kind of full stop is that not right now, these 2, and maybe broadly a place we are in the world, maybe right now this is a relationship that ran its course to some extent, but and acknowledging that, and perhaps in a way a goodbye to it, without then saying, well, if we can't be together forever, then what's the point? In that sense, I don't think the play kind of says, that this handshake has to be eternal for it to mean something. I think what we get to see is that they, as someone said in the audience, well, clearly they did affect each other. Like, then we feel sad that they aren't going to spend more time together because we want them, and that's important as well. That we've had that desire as well for we've invested in the friendship, that we go, oh, it's sad that they can't be together forever.
It's just, the thing you were saying about the kind of theatricality of the piece means, and maybe this is the trick again that we get to win with in theatre, is that in a way you give us both endings, don't you? Because you can't erase the false ending from our minds.
Exactly. And other forms can do that too, can't they? Like, other forms can give you multiple endings, and as you exist through them, then you can't have them erased. And in some ways it gets elongated, because it could have been just a small little moment, but you get a bit of prose where they really do, and they share it and they kind of ping it back and forth. So actually you do get to bathe in this thing that is a little bit, not indulgent, but it's not going to happen, but they get to just exist with it. So yeah, you do get it because it's there on the page, and then it's there on the stage.
Interesting. Yeah, so kind of wonderful that we can do that in theatre, isn't it? Whereas in film, you'd have to make a choice about which one you wanted attached to the end of the project, and once it's sealed, it's there.
That happens a lot. But then there are examples, like there's that, is it the penultimate episode of I May Destroy You, where she does get to play out. But I guess that might be symbolic of trauma as well, and figuring that out. But it's true. Often, some people in the audience talked about how there can be a tendency, perhaps, to want narrative to be A to B, and beginning, middle, end, and everything led up to a conclusion, and for there to be a kind of a neatness in narrative, and the play kind of resists that. And some might find that kind of dissatisfying, because just stake a claim and go with it. And I think, though, the feedback we had from those who stayed was that they kind of could see why you'd have those two moments next to each other.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool. So we have some questions from you guys now. Thank you very much for them. First one from Michelle and I is, there are a lot of Australian cultural references in the play. How did Rice translate to UK audiences? I was talking to someone earlier who'd worked out that everything I was doing with the ATC was a huge trick. Because of course they're international plays, but they're not unintelligible. You know what I mean? Like they relate and have a resonance with UK audiences. So like, I think, there are cultural references. And I don't know if you noticed, we tweaked a couple of lines in your play for clarity in the new version. So like Mr. David Egan, Coles supermarket CEO, we added the word supermarket, of course, because no one's going to know that Coles is a supermarket. We slightly overlabor the point of, I sprayed Glen 20 on my shoes, tried to make them stink less, so that at the end, when we get the payoff of, I can smell Glen 20, and then she goes, it's my shoes, again, just slightly pushing things, where I think, actually, you'll get these. You don't need the cultural reference of a brand name or a location or something like that.
I mean, some of the simple answer is, like, some of it's not going to make sense.
Yes.
I think quickly you might be like, oh, they're talking about something, and you can transpose your own context. But I don't know, when I put it back the other way, like down under in backwards Australia, like in terms of like imported Western culture, like we've been on the receiving end of British stuff and US stuff, and we just take it and we absorb it, and we make sense of it, because we haven't been asked, is it okay if we don't translate for you? Mm-hmm. So I think kind of taking it back, whether it's not just about Australian things, it's about other things which don't speak entirely your language. I think, some of it's not going to be familiar. And if it's too much, maybe you'll disconnect. But a little bit of, I don't know all these things, is actually like good. I think like
Hmm.
my mum, who can't speak English very well, she watched for years Days of Our Lives, and it's a different format because they are quite repetitive. But whatever, there was enough of the human dynamics there that she could kind of go, it doesn't matter that I don't understand what Roman is saying. Why is Roman dead again? That there's enough there. And I think because the play does have lots of heart and and then how you stage and you perform it, there's a lot that can kind of translate that can make up for like specific references you didn't get.
Yeah, I really think there are so few of them though. But yeah, I think ultimately you're right. I remember a woman who came to the Royal Exchange in Manchester, an elderly woman, which I think probably meant that people had expectations about what her expectations were. Um, and she said something to Sarah Frankham, who was running the theatre, which was something like, "I don't come here to know more things about things I know. I come here to find out what I don't know," which I
Yeah.
just thought was kind of beautiful. So actually,
Yes.
I want to hear the word op shop and be like, op shop, like
Yes.
opportunity shop, yeah, charity shop, a second hand shop. But I enjoy the game of like things having different etymology and different words
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
things have evolved. And then of course we were in Plymouth and we walked past a second hand shop which was called the Op Shop. So someone
Oh, okay.
somewhere somehow has travelled. Yeah, but I think with all the plays that I'm trying to introduce,
Mm,
none of them should feel so foreign. I
yeah.
use that as it's not a word I like particularly. Um, that they can't work here. That they are so kind of devoid of meaning and reference that is understandable, graspable, that they make no sense.
Mm.
I think in film, people watch some wildly different material
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of form and content and language and thematics and references.
Mm.
And I don't think we want it all to be the same.
No,
Ultimately.
I love what you just said about that audience member, and I think maybe I think about theatre, and I do want to go to theatre and not know what I know. Like sometimes you choose to consume things and watch things because it makes you work less or in a different way. But yeah, I think in theatre, I don't really want that either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you. Melina, I'm going to move on to 6, I believe. How do new international student playwrights enter the industry? Uh,
Hmm. I
you're
mean,
an you're an international playwright, but maybe you didn't know you were an international playwright until you were produced
is
internationally.
this is it, when I see the words international student and I'm assuming that actually means a person who is studying, if that's what the question means. I have slightly perhaps less to say about international students, like specifically.
Let's take the word student out
Okay.
ever so slightly, and talk about what it means to be an international playwright and where you find opportunities and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it, the way that the world is divided up a bit culturally, and that's probably because of money and stuff as well. Um, it's well for me. It wasn't the first impetus to be like, oh, can I put a play on outside of my own context? So I didn't start with international ambitions, and I know artists and writers who are kind of looking abroad from kind of earlier on, but I personally wasn't thinking about that because I do like to write things which are localized, with that maxim that, it's specificity that breeds universality.
mm,
Um, so, yeah, for me, I didn't start thinking about how do I be seen or read around the world. In this instance, I mean, in a boring way, it's a connection through like my agent and you having seen a different Australian playwright. Um, so, but for those who do kind of begin thinking about their work and their practice and their ambitions more internationally, I guess off the top of my head, I guess there is, kind of being engaged then with like, what are the if it's specifically theatre, like where do you want? Do you have a connection into into Europe, into Asia, into America, into Africa, just listing all the continents, but thinking about perhaps where you might have a bit more of your own kind of natural inclination towards, and then getting a bit more intel. Actually, there's a bigger East Asian community in America, and my cultural background, Hmong, HMONG, there's more Hmong people in America, so I've probably been maybe close to over a half a dozen times in the last 10 years. And times I've gone with professional objectives, meeting other East Asian writers, East Asian theatre companies. And if I think through the logic then, that's me going, okay, there's people kind of a bit like me who are making theatre, who are kind of practicing, and I want to talk to them. So of course you can Google and you can sign up to their e-newsletters and you can attempt to buy their plays and read what other people are writing, which I would recommend doing as well. But going on the ground and meeting people, I found was just really useful to kind of connect me into what is, in some ways, what is an American play, and what do they like in America in terms of what they expect of a play.
Does that mean you feel part of a kind of an East Asian diaspora or a Hmong diaspora?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, growing up, there was more of that, second generation, to use that language, those stories coming out of America, prolifically the Joy Luck Club, that was the first kind of big all Asian studio film, I think, coming out of Hollywood. And although I have kind of my own problems with it, in the 90s, I was like, wow, what is this? And maybe even then I was going, America. America is a place where they tell stories about people who kind of look like me.
Yeah. Do I have anything to add to international playwrights entering the industry? I mean, other than I think that it's kind of fascinating that, I guess one doesn't set out to be an international playwright. They set out to write plays.
Yeah.
And if those plays manage to cross a border, you automatically become an international playwright, whether you cross that border or not.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, I think it's kind of cool if you just want to write plays in your local area to start with. And that's also okay. And then maybe, it can happen really quickly or can happen over time, that then the conversations about what more might emerge afterwards.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd say is find those new writing hubs really. Where are they? So where are they in the UK? Where do the writers get kind of small bites of the cookie and a chance to kind of earn their stripes? So places like Theatre 503, the Royal Court, the Vaults Festival, all those kind of new workspaces. Number 7, it's a classic. What inspired you to write this play? I guess having heard the answer to that, I guess I'm slightly more interested in the second bit, which is how has it evolved from your initial concept to the final output?
Yeah, so we've kind of covered it. So there was some interest in me about it'd be cool to have these two types of actors playing lots of characters. So that was one thing. And then the stuff around the international agriculture and the kind of international arena of it came afterwards. I've talked before about the cleaner character. My mother at the time was cleaning and her English isn't so strong, so that kind of limits the kind of job she could get. So I had that kind of in my head. So the initial concept was always two people on stage playing lots of characters, and I genuinely do feel like coming to see this production, I feel so satisfied having seen this production and how the team kind of served that proposition. So it has evolved in, the best ways, where as the playwright, you have a sense and then you pass it on to, a fantastic team and they do their magic with it. And sometimes they meet you and sometimes they don't meet you, but certainly with that proposition, I feel very humbled by what Matthew and the team have done. I mean, one thing, because it had all this research in agriculture and rice and attempts at kind of businessy stuff, that took a lot of time to kind of read and get my head around. And I went to India, and I only met with one agriculture advocacy organisation, but that helped me to kind of go and just be in that place and respond to that. But what it did mean in some of the development, that was a lot of research in here, Michelle. So probably in that honing process, how it evolved was there was like a lot of fat there to kind of in a way justify and maybe I just wanted to share like all this stuff I had learned. But when it is a stripping back process too, because we're not, you don't come to the theatre to like, well, yeah, there probably is a really interesting performance lecture in international agriculture that this play isn't. And I think when it was attempting to give you more of that detail, it was just like, too much, we don't need it. So that's one way in which how it evolved. It kind of went big with lots of research, excitement, and then left a lot of it behind.
Mm-hmm. And were your intentions initially for it to be funny as well, or are you just funny?
Yeah, I probably have that instinct, and there is something I think about being ethic. I think in humour, I don't know, is it just partly survival, where because grief, anger, funny to maybe negotiate that. So yeah, I tend to write less things which are like drama, not funny. And maybe it's subversion, I guess, when you're on the margins, that is a way you fight. You go, well, you kind of always, in that kind of fuck you kind of mentality, I think humour is a natural part of that way of being, of coping, but protesting and, yeah.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. Number 8. This sounds so good, but I only just heard about it. Will the tour be extended? Especially extended to near London? No, unfortunately, is the dull answer. The way ATC work, we normally make 2 shows a year, sometimes 3 shows a year, which often means that we'll make what we refer to as an originating production, and then we will tour that originating production. So last year in September, we did a version of Rice at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond, and we are now touring that production, essentially. No, can you get to York? That's near London. It's nearer to London than where you're from. So distance is all relative, isn't it? So no, unfortunately, but please do, here comes a shameless plug, please do go to our website, atctheatre.com, join our mailing list, and you can hear about all the things we're doing and where we go, and we're often going many places near you. You just got to catch us when we're there. Which aspect of Rice was the most challenging to direct? Question. It says for Michelle, but I think that's going to have to be me. Yeah. I think the most challenging bit of the play, I think it is, for me, it's the clarity of character, and trying to get an audience to know who someone is in every single moment, and they turn around, and helping an audience know that in the moment they turn around, they're now playing a completely different character in a completely different time and place. I would say was the most challenging thing to direct. I think that's probably it. I feel like the other stuff around dialect and movement, and is stuff you're kind of working out in audition, like can this person do what's required of them? Have they got the ability to do this in the rehearsal room? So that was fine. A boring thing, it's a 49-page play divided by 2 brains, so memorization becomes quite a dull part of the process.
You mean because they really have to be in sync with each other?
They have to be in sync, and there's no one else there. They get no downtime. Whereas normally, you can be sat in your dressing room for an hour thinking, "Oh, my scene's coming up," and you come out and you do your scene. It's just the 2 of them, and they have to remember all of it, and they're not just remembering the words, but I turn up here, I do this, I put this down, which is like any play, but I think because there's just 2 of them in a 2-hander that's really a 10-hander, it's just a slightly harder juggling act for them. What's the main message of the play? Okay. The main message of the play, let's go with you first, Michelle Lee. Because mine's quite cynical and dark. The more time I spend with the play, the more I realise it's a miserable, tragic comedy.
What is the main message of the play? Is that?
Do you do messages? You don't have to, do you? You can do investigations. You can do...
Yeah. That's what I love about theatre. Or I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, is that just sloppy writing? Because I feel like in TV and film, like, what is the premise? We'll argue something and kind of conclude something and build it that way. Like, it sits here and everything is like
Singing that same song.
Yeah, and this, I don't know if I wrote this play again, maybe I'd take that approach. I probably did attempt to, but it just becomes so, in the texture of it, I don't know, it's so slippery that I find it hard to approach watching a play or reading a play or writing a play looking just for a message. I guess if we talk about more perhaps vague things around themes and the kind of mind map of themes.
What's registering? Like, what's the big word in the middle?
What is the phrase? What might be a phrase? I guess it is. I'm going to say female friendship, but like specifically in this kind of in the world we live in the context we live in, where there are kind of challenges and pressures just to be women alone, and then to be women who are working, and then to be women who are friends, and so it is about like kind of being a woman in the professional context, and also having a friend. Okay, so headline: female friendship.
Yeah.
I think I hope that's what kind of gets up to the surface.
Yeah. What do we do? No, I think I'm just trying to like frame what it is for me as a question. What do we do with the expectations our parents hand down to us? Is a big part of it for me. In that you have Cherie rejecting her mother's advice and support and love, whilst desperately needing it, trying to carve out her own space separately from her mother. And then you have Nisha feeling like she's carrying the weight of, parents traveling across oceans or grandparents traveling across oceans and sacrificing. So how do we deliver the dreams our parents had for us, or something like that?
Okay, yeah, and there's something there around, I guess, because friendship is a bit more like peer to peer, and there's a lot of relationships in the play that are more like literally about mother, daughter, like legacy and passing things on.
And Yvette offers some form of kind of proxy relationship, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Or doesn't.
Doesn't. I don't. But that's not a very. I guess that's not a very succinct way to answer the question, which maybe is the point that the play has like. I know it sounds kind of obvious. The play has got different meanings, but if the question is what was the intention, for me, I can't remember now.
There's been a pandemic. You've had a child. So much has changed.
But then maybe I can ask you a question, Matthew. Is your process when you're working with text that is largely about like characters and stuff? Is that how you guide your process, where you are like, hey, everyone, we're going to interpret this play as it's about ambition? Or
yes and no. I think I'd certainly like to know why we're making the play. And sometimes in a play, I'll find a single line of text. I'm like, that's the play. That's the whole play. Yeah. So like I did a version of Frankenstein, and the central question is, why is masculine ambition so destructive? Because it felt like that was what the book was doing in a way, and then the writer I asked to adapt it was very much interested in a kind of feminist approach to Frankenstein. So with this, I don't ever have that kind of unanswerable question, but I definitely think it's about. I thought it was really simply, it's about a woman who's losing her grandmother, and so finds a replacement grandmother for the time being, in a way. But that's never really written large in there. And when we started developing like workshops around it that we were going to try and do in some of the locations we visited, one of them was called Recipes from My Other Mother, which was like influential women, preferably older than you, whoever you were, be male, female, non-binary. But this idea that, like, going back to the village, I guess that there are. It's not only your mother who mothers you in the bringing up. So I thought that was in there because thematically it's so wide ranging. Grief, single parenthood, migration, everything. Like some of the smaller themes that are in there, like single parenthood is a theme within there, isn't it? But I think to really examine it, it must be something to do with the relationship between Nisha and Yvette, and that's about what they give each other when they're both losing their version of that person in their own life. So one losing their daughter, one losing their grandmother.
Yeah.
Can you fill the gaps? Advice for upcoming directors. Oh, no, sorry. Let's go back one. Throughout your creative evolution to this point, have there been other playwrights whose work has influenced you?
Yeah, of course. When I had a kid about 5 years ago, and then I was like not going out as much, and then I began to read more plays. It sounds kind of obvious, but for a long time I was just seeing plays in production.
Yeah.
Like that was the way I kind of experienced theatre. And I worked in theatre a couple of years, just briefly for actually a couple of years. So, the rain.
That's rain.
So I began to read more. And then like assessing and judging plays more. So I was like, I just love to read them as pieces of work. So that's kind of a broad thing to be like, just go and read more plays as well. Like read them on the page, you read widely. And if you are in other cities, like last time I was here, I was like, I'll go to the National Theatre. There's probably other bookshops, but that's just where I ended up last time. Bought a bunch of plays. There was when young Jean Lee was kind of breaking out in the States, like watched but sometimes it's me saying like just go buy the plays because it can be hard to just go buy the plays because it might be hard to get them. So I watched like a recording of The Shipment, and then young Jean Lee had a work in International Festival in Melbourne, and then. They're the works I saw, and then the other stuff I just kind of read obsessively about. And what I liked about young Jean Lee was there is that element of her, I guess, autobiography. She's got that play about growing up really hyper-religious. And then there's other things, she is so formally experimental, and I guess she has a directing lens as well. But I just like the scope of her work. And I read in her manifesto on her website that a way for her to approach work is to go, what is kind of the last thing that, like to go towards, to have courage and go towards the things that you don't know. And of course you have to have you have to be drawn to something. Oh, okay. But I loved reading her stuff, watching stuff, and kind of reading about her process. I mean, of course, Carol Churchill, and I think for Carol Churchill, it's the form, but it's the language as well, like an attention to, it sounds fun to say, but it's so poetic. Like you can just read it as bits of literature and go, oh gosh, just the words. There's a bunch of Australian playwrights. Melissa Butnich is an Australian playwright that's based in the UK.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I've loved reading some of her plays. Like she's bitingly funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a bunch of Australian playwrights too.
Who are your favourite? Go on. Who are your top 3 Australian playwrights? If you know they've got something on, you'll definitely be booking tickets.
I know. Some are biased because they're become friends of mine. I love Zoe Dawson and Rachel Perks. I like Morgan Rose. They're Melbourne-based female and non-binary playwrights. A more prolific playwright to some extent, Kate Mulvaney, who's come from acting as well, but she's such a fantastic writer. Beautiful adaptations, and I don't know, just a real joy. And maybe it is her acting brain. I feel like you get into the scenes and this is just a real clarity without it being prescriptive, and a real, I don't know, a joy and a love for the character. I'm told that she's kind of beautiful to work with as well. So yeah, sometimes I do love reading from actor writers. Like I think the way that they write is kind of different, but obviously there's a theme here, female and non-binary.
Yeah.
writers. But also, like, I mean, some of the plays I first picked up at the library, like, ages ago, were by, like, so David Williamson is, like, our grandfather of theatre, and some of the stuff he wrote in the 70s is just rocking. Like, that's when the Australian kind of voice was kind of coming into visibility. So maybe my point is also just kind of reading before you. I know it's kind of obvious. I know it's obvious that it's to read before you, but going into the recent past. That's so actually there's like lots of things that I've enjoyed reading. But yeah, when I was in Singapore a few years ago, like also just going, I want to read like into Asia as well, and kind of resist this like it's only the UK, it's only America that I want to read. So also kind of reading into different regions as well.
Does that involve having to find work in translation?
No, because English is, I think, a national language in Singapore. So, the plays that I read. But then there were some that were playing with the kind of like Singlish. So then that was delightful, like that attention to language, dialect, that going back to that lady you spoke about. Like, I don't know those things, and it's not just kind of being like ogling, like, oh, it's not me, and it's exoticizing, like that attention to language, that it could only come from that kind of context where there is like the mash of English butting up against like the other languages in a different way that you don't get in Australia.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is a question I'm petrified of asking, but we'll see where it goes. How does it feel to hand your work over to directors?
Oh, why are you petrified?
Because I'm sending you every good review just before you got off the plane. They like it, Michelle, so if you don't like it, it's fine because they do. Because I think, like, I don't know, there's that sense, isn't there, of this is your show. It came out of your head. You sat for, I have no idea how long. This could have been something you started thinking about when you were 12, and then 10 years later you'd written it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's such a delicate and sensitive offering for a writer to give their work to a director who you then hope doesn't trample all over it.
Yeah, so I mean, the question is partly about that collaboration, like that aspect of working in theatre is like, obviously you are working in partnerships and sometimes you don't know what it's going to be like. So like in principle, I kind of love it because I don't want to direct, and I also welcome what a team discovers. And this is, I mean, talking more about like developing a work that then will get presented. Like I've just benefited so much from kind of going, oh, okay, having the conversations with others. So I find it immensely like rewarding and useful to have directors running workshops and the dramaturgical brain of directors, because they are thinking then about, I think the good directors who are good at working with text and new writers, they can kind of attend to like, there's certain stages where we're not going to talk about like, how are you going to stage it? They are just going, what do you want to write? And then the directors who can also go, all right, well, let's start maybe testing it against like how I might move and what is it like when it's embodied. So I find, I love working with directors, and for me, I just find directors, designers, performers, they always just surprise you. Yeah, there might be some things where I'm like, oh, that's a choice that I wouldn't have imagined. And it might be not what I kind of had intended, but I honestly don't think I've ever worked on anything where I was like, that director has... and I think with new writing, because directors who like to work with new writing, they like to work with new writing. There's plenty of directors who they want to go into, just like, I guess, the classics, the well-worn kind of territory, to make their mark and to the part and do their thing. I think generally a director who wants to work with new writing kind of does like writers and wants to kind of go, what's going on here in what you're doing? And of course, they have to bring their own vision. Like, why I welcome that. But I generally think directors who like to work with new writing kind of like writers and feel kind of welcome, generally. Yeah.
It's fascinating that the I don't know, different cultures maybe have different relationships with the expectations around the writer and the director. Just I think of that kind of European, particularly very German thing, which is that the writer writes the play and then hands it to the director and turns up on the first preview.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Versus something here, which is that the writer is king. I guess it's that, isn't it? In Germany, maybe director is king. Here, the writer's king. In America, there's lots of having the writer in the room the entire time. which I think here feels like they've overstayed their welcome.
Yeah,
And everyone
that,
suddenly kind of looks to the right of France as.
Yeah, well, that, like in Australia, I mean, I want to be in there maybe for the first week, and I just want to step away because it is a different dynamic if the rider is in. And if it's not a device thing and you kind of like the text is ready enough, like there's only so much you're going to find by like writer to solve in like second week of rehearsals anyway. Oh, okay, all right, finish.
Cool, all done. What's the time? Oh gosh, we're nearly at the end. Okay, one bit of advice for writers and directors. Cool. Me, I go while you think. So the bit of it's kind of slightly stealing what Michelle said earlier, which is see theatre, see lots of theatre, and if you can, where possible, try and avoid getting caught up in the spectacle and the show of it all, and try and analyse the work that's going on. Something I think is quite useful being in a space. Why that lighting cue then? Why that sound cue then? Why not 2 lines earlier? Why is that actor moving off stage now? How are they going to get all those people off stage in a blackout? Whatever the practical questions are. So see theatre and ask questions.
Advice for writers. Yeah, I mean, voice is such a hard thing to define, isn't it? It's like that kind of your signature. And maybe I shouldn't attempt to define it because I feel like we kind of know what that means, like your unique thing. Like I guess particularly for theatre writing, and maybe for those of you who might want to move into more author-led like TV or podcasts, that you know there is value in that, and of course there is the natural like collaboration negotiation to find what it is, but I guess just be like fearless and holding on to like your voice, like what's important to you about a work, maybe even when you feel like you don't know what that is, but just to in a way like that is really special and that's unique. So you do your best to kind of nurture that and preserve it and value it.
Yeah, the uniqueness. Thank you all for tuning in and sticking with us on, I don't know where you are, but it's incredibly wet and windy here now. The final things for me to say, other than thank you, are the brilliant Melina, who is our associate producer, who is sat just here making a whole array of faces, has been a technical wizard, so thank you, Melina. Melina is going to pop a survey into the chat, and if she has your email address, you may find one in your inbox as well. The survey is what do you think of our Q&A, and it will help us kind of shape them, improve them, make them more what you need them to be going forward in the future. That's all from us. You've got a plane to catch, so we should probably hurry up and finish.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.